what I believe is that whether you have an organization or a business or a ministry, you have lots that you can talk about. And a lot of times people talk in sameness,
Mhm.
and it's really a disservice to everybody around them and to the organization, because if you say same, then people just have to make a choice. What will I make a choice about? And that's where a thread comes in, where you can become known for something, that one unifying factor that pulls everything in underneath the umbrella, so that your brand is really your thread, that you're known for this, and then you become a branded house and not a house of brands.
Hi, and welcome to the 91 Day Success Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Mast, and I am thrilled today to have Mark MacDonald with us, who is author of an amazing book, which I got to hold up here, Be Known for Something. And what's so cool about this is, many of you know, I'm a Christian and a marketer, and Mark's both as well. In fact, this book is designed for churches to figure out how they can market themselves. And I'm going to mess it all up. But Mark, if you would, give us kind of the 30-second overview. I know we've got a lot of business people and entrepreneurs watching, and obviously some believers as well. But why is this going to be of interest, and why is your book relevant to everybody, really, when it comes to marketing and the things that you're talking about? Give us in 30 seconds or so, what would you say?
Sure. In our crazy world where everything is noisy and the communication is just by pushing from all kinds of different angles, you've got to stand out. And everyone stands out for a particular reason. And I believe that everyone needs to control that lane, so you actually become known for something, and make sure that you're known for something that other people need. And then you pretty much have a successful lane that you can head down. So the book walks through our process that we've been doing for, wow, about 23 years now. And it's a really easy read, but it's kind of, you know what? Here's what I've found along the way, and here's what you can learn from it. And the way that the book is actually set up is, at the end of every chapter, there's workbook questions, so that you can say, okay, I agree with this whole chapter, but most people say I agree with it, and then they move on, rather than slowing down and actually taking the time to work through some of the steps that we want to work through for the process.
No, it's actually one of the things I really liked about your book, Mark. There's no doubt the title got me the first time I saw it. I'm like, be known for something. I've got to look at that book. And then I picked it up and looked at it. And as I read it, you're right. One of the things that really resonated with me and that I liked is your style to take a pause at the end of each chapter and make sure that information you'd shared was really getting set in my head and something that I was doing something with, as opposed to just, okay, yep, that makes sense. Move on. Let's go to the next chapter and then forget about it. So I really enjoyed your book from so many perspectives. And that was definitely one of them, but great title as well. Love it. And again, really easy read. Like you said, I found it really easy to digest, made a lot of sense. I like the stories you shared, lots of great examples. Let's take a little step back before we get into the book, though. Your background's in advertising and brand strategy. And I know you mentioned you've been doing things like this for 20 plus years. How did you transition into focusing on branding for churches of all things?
Wow. I'm really an unlikely communication sage. I've had so many opportunities that I've got to learn from. And so I graduated with graphic design degree, and my whole aspiration was to work at an agency. And I'm Canadian, eh? So I moved back to, I actually came to the States for my schooling, moved back to Canada, and ended up, like, God just really controlled where I got my experience. The first job that I had, they confirmed in my mind that I had some skills. And then a very large agency, one of Eastern Canada's largest ad agencies, hired me as a studio manager. And then I made my progression up the ladder there. as studio manager, designer, art director, and then senior art director, and then a junior creative director, and then ended up as their senior creative director. Started working with a ton of different, very large firms, multi-million dollar accounts. I so enjoyed it, but the entire time I kept thinking, so why doesn't the church know this stuff? And things that come naturally for the business, oftentimes the church kind of lags behind a little bit.
So
Uh,
true.
and so many times I would say to a pastor, so what do you do for marketing? And they would go, we don't do marketing, we're the church. And that's probably the number one question that I get. Like when I'm on a flight and we're just chit chatting with somebody who I don't know from a hole in the ground next to me, oftentimes it's like, so what do you do? And I'll say, work in church communication. And they say, what's that? And it's like, it's basically marketing. And almost always it takes that person a step back and they're like, I never thought that a church would need marketing. And really, that's where we decided as a family to move from East Coast Canada all the way down to North Carolina, set up an agency there, got national voice because we became the national arm, or the arm for the National Association of Church Facility Managers, National Association of Church Business Administration, National Association of Church Design Builders. And through that, they got me onto the national stage where I got to speak and talk to pastors, ministry leaders. And it's taken a fair amount of time. Like it's not necessarily a mature industry yet, if you want to call it an industry. But when we first started, we started talking about church communication, and people just looked at us like, are you absolutely crazy? So it's been fun, and it's been fun watching how it's just somewhat exploded, especially once websites and social media and the complexity with SEO and AI and all of that
Mhm.
stuff, as that's reached its pinnacle in the business, the church is pretty much catching up or have caught up to it, which I find fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. And you and I talked a little bit in the pre-call, and it certainly I've noticed the same thing. Marketing seems to be one of those dirty words in the church, and nobody wants to be a marketer or market because we shouldn't have to. But yet, in my opinion, what better thing as a believer can I market than my faith? It's awesome. I love it. I love where you went with that. You talk in the book, Mark, about the concept of a thread. Can you describe that a little bit, and both how that applies to churches, but also based on your secular work, how does that apply to business and entrepreneurs in general?
It was interesting when I was working on the book. I took about a year to write the book. It became an Amazon bestseller when it came out. And as I was working on it, constantly I'm thinking, how can we brand this? How can we make it our own? And the big thing that I've realized in the big agency world, and every person who's listening to this needs to understand that is, if you are compared to somebody else in sameness, then you need to be able to position yourself a little bit differently. Traditionally, that's called brand positioning, but I didn't think I could own brand positioning. So I thought, what if we called it a thread? Because social media was full force, and everyone kind of understands when somebody puts a post up, all the comments, most of the comments have to do with that original post. So it's about the thread. And so what I believe is that whether you have an organization or a business or a ministry, you have lots that you can talk about. And a lot of times people talk in sameness,
Mhm.
and it's really a disservice to everybody around them and to the organization, because if you say same, then people just have to make a choice. What will I make a choice about? And that's where a thread comes in, where you can become known for something, that one unifying factor that pulls everything in underneath the umbrella so that your brand is really your thread, that you're known for this, and then you become a branded house and not a house of brands.
Mm. I so appreciate that explanation. That makes so much sense, and I think should resonate with everyone. It's again that makes so much sense. How do you?
Ultimately, if someone doesn't know their thread or know their brand
Mhm.
positioning, they really don't have a brand, because you're not controlling anything. You're just telling everybody what's going on. And if you always come back to the thread, that big thing that you want to be known for us to be known for something, a church branding agency, we want to be known for discovering your thread. So we just constantly always come back to discover your thread. How do you discover your thread? Once you have a thread, then what do you do with that thread? So what ends up happening is you end up not talking and adding to noise. Instead, you're actually saying less and people will listen more.
So true, and I think incredibly profound. It's something that so many miss, especially when it comes to church branding. And one of the things I loved, and I don't remember if it was in the book or one of the things you wrote, because I've read a lot of the things you've written as well, but how you talked about how that's one of the things that so many churches and I think businesses as well suffer from, and that's they're not distinguishing themselves. They're acting just like everybody else, and they're not promoting that uniqueness about them, and therefore people just say, okay, you're the same as everybody else, when that's never truly the case. I think that's just such a common thing to happen. Can you share with us, talk to us a little bit about, as you approach churches and as you work with them, what type of response do you get from them after 20 some years? Has that changed at all, or do you still find that you're on a bit of an uphill battle in convincing those leaders that this too is, as a church, is something that needs to be branded and marketed?
Oh, and my mind just rolls through how many conversations I have. It's interesting because when I first started talking to churches about marketing, and I got the no, we're not interested in that. What I realized was that I had to change the conversation. And instead of asking, what do you do for marketing, or what is your church brand? It became, so what do you think you're known for in your community?
Mm.
If I come at it from that vantage point, the pastor goes, oh, that's a good question. Tell me a little bit more about what you're thinking about. And that's where good marketing, good branding comes into play. So if you know, whatever wares you're selling, whatever product you're selling or service, if you're going to your potential audience and they're saying, I don't need that, or I like, tell me less, ultimately,
Hmm.
then you got to change your messaging so that it becomes more about what they care about. And I think every pastor cares about what is the perception of our local church. And then I like to introduce what is the perception of the big universal church, everyone who is a Christ follower. So at that point, I have fully engaged the pastor. And then I say, what if you could actually control your perception and move from what you currently are to what you should be so that you become relevant and needed? And then usually that's where it's,
Yeah,
reel them
absolutely.
in.
Oh, I love it. One of the things I was noticing on the book behind you, and I noticed it here too, is this is the post COVID edition. Talk to me a little bit, Mark, in your mind, how did COVID change church branding in particular? And do you think any of that applies to businesses as well?
Wow. So COVID changed so much, and it accelerated a lot of things that were happening already in the church. We've been seeing numbers where people have been somewhat drifting away from church. Back in the day, the Little House on the Prairie days, where
Hmm.
people move into one area and then instantly it's, hey, can I build here? And yes, of course. And birds of a feather flock together. And then almost instantly they say, okay, so we need to build a church. Like, we have to have a church. And the church became the center of the community. And everybody who was in the community went to church. And slowly but surely, that has stopped happening. And COVID kind of accentuated it, mainly because when COVID shut a lot of businesses down, it also shut a lot of churches down.
Hmm.
Pastors are quick to say, we really didn't shut down, we just went online. That accelerated that process, because we've been saying for so many years, you need to have an online presence. You need to make sure that you have the ability to get donations online, as well as do services and do as much as possible online. So that accelerated things. But what we saw when post COVID happened, a lot of people who we thought were regular attenders, which is a pretty low bar right now, but regular attenders, they didn't come back. And so most churches that I've talked to probably are suffering about 30% decline, sometimes
Wow.
20% decline. So about a third of our people were doing something on a regular basis. It was a habit that they had formed, that it got broken. And during COVID, they realized, wow, lightning didn't strike and kill me. I survived without church, which is a sad thing. And it's a wake up call to pastors, especially, who, what we need to be telling our people why they like us. And it sounds so self-serving, but ultimately, if people don't know, or if it's not a controlled message that's being told to them on a regular basis, the reason why we gather every week is because of this and this, you become known for whatever their perception is. And a lot of people saw during COVID, if I don't go to church on Sunday, I get an entire day back or a half day back. And then there's the tension of, okay, I watched online and it was just as good as going in person. So now we're wrestling with, how do you get online attendance to become in-person attendance? So how do you convert that? Because there's still a lot of people who are lagging behind watching online. And a lot of pastors believe that, no, there's something special that happens in the room that we'd like to bring them back for. For business owners, if you're not telling people why they like you and controlling that message, they come up with their own story in their own mind. And if you want to be known for all of those different stories, you'll just be known for nothing.
Oh, so true. It's so interesting to hear the parallels between the conversations I have with business owners and the conversations you're having with pastors, and how that works, even just related to the audience shift from in the church to now online. And then how do we reach and get them engaged? It reminds me of the conversations I have with business owners who are talking about, I've got a great following online and I've got people that engage with me online, but they're not doing business with me. And it's a similar type thing about, how do we engage with them and get them to take that next step? And of course, I love that, because I've been a believer for years that the church does need to do more marketing, and it needs to do that. It's why one of the reasons I was so excited about your book. I love this, because as a marketer, it's interesting to me. The concepts are so similar, even though we're talking different subject matter and all that. And it sounds like a lot of the pushback and the feedback is similar as well, which I think is just hugely interesting. From your perspective, Mark, talk to me about churches in particular, but what are some of the mistakes that you see them making when it comes to communication and marketing and branding? And I know you mentioned being the same as everybody else, and I know that's probably one of the biggies, but what are some of the other areas? I know I've got some thoughts, but I'd be really curious what you're seeing, as particularly in communications. Where are they dropping the ball?
And weirdly enough, it's probably where most businesses drop the ball. They just talk far too much. And anyone who sat through a long sermon says amen to that. Uh,
Yes.
And I'm not here to bash pastors and what how long their sermons should be, but if you say it shorter and have them wanting more at the end, it's a whole lot different than saying just a little too much and having them wanting less. And when all of the world of communication has dropped onto the church, where it used to be that the main form of communication for a church is who's going to change the church sign, put that
Yeah. Yeah.
statement out there. And then all of a sudden it moved to bulletins and printed bulletins and worship guides. And then usually that's a secretary or a ministry position, a ministry assistant position, who looked after the bulletin. Why? Because they can type. And so they typed up the bulletin, they created a structure, a process, and it created what I call the print hub. Everything revolved around that print piece. And then the world changed. The world added email and social media and websites. And we need to make sure, a lot of times the church still likes to go back to the print because the people trust the print material. And instead, we need to create confidence in our digital hub and make sure that our website is really good, because everyone has access to the website, but everyone does not have access to your printed bulletin. In the same sense, I think most businesses have done it because they don't rely heavily on a group gathering where you can hand it out every single time. So the church needs to, for the most part, work on their website. Like, oftentimes they just don't do a great job.
Sure.
The moment that somebody comes to your website and does a website experience, what we call a session, it's about 30 seconds, which is just crazy. So you don't take in too much in 30 seconds. People are only probably going to click about 3 times, which gives them about a 10-second window to look at a web page. And you've got to be able to say it in the way that they want it. And if they can't find it, or if they can't scan through and detect what you're trying to get in your content, if it delays them 1 second, it will mean that they will pick up the phone and call and say, I can't find it on your website. And so if anyone ever, whether it's a church or a business or an organization, if they just constantly get emails and phone calls saying, I can't find it on your website, your sitemap's probably broken, your whole organization, and then the scannability of your pages need to be brought up to speed. And rely heavily on the website as soon as you have it in place. That's what I find often. The church quickly goes back to, so you probably picked up a bulletin, or now they've moved to apps, go to the app. But they need to rely heavily on the website, and they need to talk consistently using language that feels like you need our website, and I use our website. And sometimes I'll talk to pastors and they haven't been to their website for years.
Oh, yes. No, in fact, it's interesting you say that. It reminds me, I recently had a discussion with a pastor, and we were talking, they've just implemented an app, and that's great. And he was talking about some events that were coming up, and I was looking for them on the website. I was on my phone, and he goes, well, they're on our app. And I'm like, but I don't go to your church. I don't have your app. And I remember we had a discussion. Is this an event that's attended just for regular attenders, quote unquote, or is this an outreach event? And it happened to be an outreach event. And I said, who thought through this on your team? Because the people that are not attending your church probably don't have the app. And they're certainly not going to take that step to go download the app just to learn about an event. They will go to your website, though, and you need to have that information. And I thought what he said was really interesting to me. And that's the person who'd convinced them to do that was actually the person that sold them the app. And
Of course.
I'm like, of course, that's what they think, and that's what they want to do. And I'm not saying the app is bad. It had a lot of value, but I thought it was really interesting. And then to hear you say that same thing, it just really resonated with me that I, I can imagine as a pastor or an executive pastor, a leader in a church, you've got people like just like we all do, trying to sell us stuff every day. And when that app salesman comes, and I'm not opposed to apps, but I think we need to remember, as I always tell, and probably you'd say too, we always need to think about who our audience is and how can we make it as easy as possible for that audience to find the data that they want. And that means hiding data on an app for outreach is not a great idea, because those that we're reaching out to are very unlikely to have that app or to want to install it. Again, not saying the app's bad, but it just really resonated with me. I think that's really insightful on your part to be able to help the churches understand that. And from a business perspective, really the exact same thing. How many times I've heard a business tell me, that's on this flyer, and they'll hold the flyer up. I'm like, yes, but the people that are looking for your business for whatever reason, they don't have that flyer in front of them. They have the
No.
website, and they need to be able to find that.
What's interesting, and we might as well keep the hate mail coming.
That's all right.
You'll
I'm good
give
with
your
it.
email, right?
Yeah. It's Jonathan at valorcircle.com, guys. Send it there.
Nice. Exactly. And what's interesting is that you've got to realize that the app is for internal audience only, not external audience. And most people internally, they will download an app, and like the statistics are incredibly, it's 80 or 90% of the people will only use it that one time. And one of the other interesting things that I get to do is a church will hire me to be a mystery visitor, where they fly me in, I do a demographic study of their community, and then I take on that role as a persona, and I go through their first impressions and guest services and experience the whole church. And I unearth an awful lot of things. But the one thing, even if the church has an app, it's oftentimes not talked about. And usually the website's not talked about either. And I know why the website's not talked about is because it sucks. Like, it's really bad. So they don't want to talk about it. And what oftentimes I hear is, you know what, our website's so bad, I think we're going to get an app. And I reassure them that within moments, their app will look just as bad as their website, because you have to have controls and a communication strategy to make a website work. And those same things for an internal audience have to be maintained for an app. And most churches are not up to that at all.
Yeah, nor are most businesses, candidly. Most of them just don't have the bandwidth. I'll admit, I'm a big fan of content marketing. I create videos in batch mode, and I upload videos every day or virtually every day. And it's done wonders for our business, and it's been helpful. But it's also been arduous, because it took me almost a year of uploading videos and nobody saying anything, nobody doing anything, to all of a sudden, just as you, having been in business for 20 some years, you become an overnight success, because all of a sudden everybody knows about you. 4, 8, 10, 12 years, nobody knew about you. And then you had to have that persistence. And I think the same thing's true with what we're talking about here. You've got to have that consistency that keeps carrying through. And I don't think many churches, nor businesses for that matter, have the fortitude to try something and go, okay, we're going to do this. And, oh, we didn't get a great response after 3 weeks, so we decided we weren't going to update it anymore. They need to commit to do it for a year or more, and then see, did the community accept it? After a year of that new app and posting updates regularly and keeping it updated and reminding people in the church, that's where to go to give, and that's where to go to see the calendar, and that's where, then if it's not working, okay, it's not working. But not after 3 weeks of trying it and mentioning it once on the day it was released. So
that's right. And so what we need to do is, for Jonathan's sake, you need to go to the comment section and just post a comment, please. We're all out here trying to create content, and sometimes we know you're watching, we know you're listening in. Just throw us a piece of chocolate or something under a comment, or a like, or do something, because really it is a lot of work. And for the people who are slogging it out for they're a small business or even a medium-sized business, it's really where the church is at, because the church, some of the bigger churches do have a communications team, but most of the people who are running the small church, the senior pastor is the communications director
Absolutely.
as well as
Yeah.
everything else that they have to do. They're mowing the lawn sometimes. It's a tiring process. You create an awful lot and you hope that somebody will follow. And that's where the church is at. That's where businesses are at. I would just encourage you to always come down to a thread so that people actually you become known for that thread, so that people tune in. We follow our social influencers because they're all about this. They know their lane. And oftentimes when they do know their lane and then they drive quite far away outside of their lane, we all scratch our heads. We'll give them a couple of times, but if they stay outside of their lane too long, we just stop following them. So all this work will pay off as long as you discover your thread and just calm everything else down.
Oh, if you get nothing else from this podcast, audience, re-listen to the last 30 seconds of what Mark said. I don't care who you are, what you do. I think that applies so crucially, and that it's hard. I know as business owners, I'm sure it's probably hard as pastors too, to try to say, okay, this is my one message and I need to stick on that one message. But it is so critical because, as Mark said, if you step outside of your lane, if you go off of your thread, you don't have very long or people are just going to stop following you, because they are paying attention because of what you're focused on and because of your consistency in that area. It doesn't mean you preach one sermon every Sunday, but the topic and the things you're talking about need to stay the same. If you move into something totally different, that's not going to work and you're going to lose that. And I've actually seen it here locally with a pastor that I love and know very well, that did a podcast, was doing great, and then veered off into not a bad area, but it was unrelated directly to the church. And it had to do with healthcare and that. And he was very passionate about it because it related to his life, but it didn't work for him because the people that were watching to learn about God's grace and to learn about the Holy Spirit, that just didn't resonate when he moved off topic. And like you said, I know a lot of people gave him 1 or 2 episodes and then never mind. And again, brilliant pastor, wonderful speaker, great teacher. But the importance of staying on that from a marketing perspective is so incredibly important. Brilliant words there, Mark. Thank you for sharing that. That's absolute gold nuggets.
We need to preach that to even the writers who write our TV series.
Yes.
How long we watch a TV series and we just love it for a particular reason, and then one season they decide we're just going to take this rabbit trail, and then they wonder why viewership dies off. It's because we have too much stuff that we can choose from now, that we just choose another way who feels a little bit more with what we're actually looking for. The book it's just a crazy simple process that kind of walks you through. It is directed towards the church and towards pastors, but every time you pastor, just read it as business owner, and it transfers quite easily over to anybody who's listening, because ultimately, and this might be a future book, you personally need to be known for something. And that whole personal edition, I'm concentrating on that as well, because as a business owner, you sometimes take on the greater thread of your company, and you are become almost interchangeable with your business. That we could go into more counseling,
Oh,
John,
I was going to say, we could talk for hours on that. Yeah.
but in some sense, yeah, as the owner or the founder or the person who sets up a business, yeah, probably your heart, soul, life, everything gets rolled into your business. But at a certain point, you need to separate that and know what your business thread is. And it can be different from your personal thread.
Absolutely.
And that's where the replication can happen, where you can hire more people and they adopt what your thread is of your business, and they don't necessarily have to adopt who you are personally.
Hmm. There's no doubt, Mark. I absolutely agree that regardless of what industry you're in, your book has just core tenets that everybody needs to read. And it's so easy to read. It's one of the reasons I wanted you on the podcast, even though we don't just create the podcast for pastors. Obviously, I'd love to encourage pastors to do it. But one of the things I thought was so great was the fact that there's lots and lots of marketing books out there, and the opportunity to get a pastor to read a marketing book is probably going to be nil at best. They've got lots of other things to do. But now you've given them a book about church marketing and church communications, which I truly hope resonates. And based on your bestseller status, obviously it has. But I just think it's great and amazing. So one of the things I'd love to do, and didn't talk to you beforehand, Mike may have, our producer, but we call this the 91 Day Success Podcast because another book that I thought was very interesting a couple years ago that I actually read during COVID was this. And it's, what would you do if you lost everything and you had 30 days to start over? And practically, I thought 30 days isn't long enough because most of us, if we were starting over, one, we'd need more than 30 days, or if we were starting a side hustle, we need more than 30 days. 3 months, yeah, it's still a push, but it's closer. I've never asked this in context of a church, but I know there's new church plants every day. From your perspective, Mark, if you were planting a new church and you had a limited budget, because every church does, what would you recommend they focus on in the first 91 days or 3 months in order to launch as strongly as possible into their community?
And it's an interesting question because it's what we hear all the time. People, pastors of traditional churches in the traditional denominations are constantly saying, so do you have the secret? How can we start growing again? And then I'll say, so is there any other church in your area that has grown? And they'll say, yes, the church plant down the road or the non-denominational church.
Yeah.
And in some sense, like, and they always say, do you know the secret? Why does that work? I do know the secret. And the secret is that they concentrate on audience. So effective communication rises and falls on how well you know your audience, except that Jesus calls us to more than just knowing our audience. He calls us to love our audience. And if we love our audience, truly love them, or get to know them enough so that we love them, the church needs to figure out, so what do they need? What are their biggest needs, concerns, or what is a goal that they've tried to reach, but they just can't reach by themselves? They need a guide to come alongside of them. The church needs to love them enough to say, you know what, we're going to help you with those things. And it's probably not going to be a spiritual thing, first of all. Instead, it's going to be something that comes to mind, keeps them up at night, weighs on their shoulders, and just concentrate demographically on the reach area of your potential or your new or your current congregation, and just fall in love with your community. Get out and talk to them, do focus groups, figure out what is it that is missing in their life that they need help with. And if you can create your product, don't rely heavily on those ministries that we've always done and the way that we've always done them. Instead, say, so how can we produce something so that they will actually be attracted to it? It's a guarantee for success. We do have the best product in the world. It's death
Absolutely.
to life. Ultimately, that is the way that you can truly love your community, but get their attention first by talking about their needs, concerns, and goals. And then in that engagement, when they look up, you then say, you know what, the reason why we do this is because of Jesus.
Oh, I love it. Fantastic advice. And again, just amazing overall. Mark, I could go on talking to you for hours, and I'm sure that would bore most of the podcast listeners, but I'd have a great time. I just want to thank you so much for what you shared. And if you're watching the podcast, I really do want to encourage you. Take the time, go out and pick up a copy of Mark's book. It's amazing. It's an easy read. As I mentioned, I love what he's done at the end of the chapters to make everything applicable to your life. And whether you're a businessman, an entrepreneur, or a pastor or a leader in a church, maybe you're on the consistory or the leadership team, maybe you're just the communications director. pick up the book. You will absolutely help move God's kingdom forward and maybe your business as well. Mark, I know we're
And
going to put your,
you
go
could
ahead.
even buy an extra book and give it to your pastor. And
Oh, I
it's
love that
written,
idea.
and I am a pastor, and I've written it as a pastor to another pastor, even though I have a lot of marketing background. So I want all pastors just to understand, if you want people to choose you, you need to control your thread, discover it first, and then control it so you become known for something that's relevant and needed.
Oh, absolutely. Mark, I know a lot of our listeners are listening, maybe while they're driving in the car or whatever, and we're going to put all your contact information here. But if they wanted to connect, they're driving down the road, what's the best way for them to find your book or to connect with you as a church and maybe figure out how you can help them grow?
For sure. So remember, be known for something, and that's our website, beknownforsomething.com. And and then you can buy our book on our website. It's an easy to read and easy to lead book. So a lot of times pastors will buy a pack of books and like actually walk through all of their leadership staff, walk them through all those workbook questions, and be able to discover their thread that way. If you want some discounts on that, we have some multiple pack discounts on Be Known for Something. And then Amazon also has it. You can buy as many as you want off of Amazon.
Awesome. I love it. I love Be Known for Something. I think it is fantastic. Mark, I really want to thank you for your time. I know you're busy. You've got a lot going on, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us and share your perspective.
Well,
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
thank you, Jonathan, for having me. And I'm praying for all the churches out there. And I run a small business. I run this agency. So I'm praying for all the business owners as well.
All right. Thank you. And I appreciate that greatly. Guys, thank you for hanging out with us. We really appreciate you sticking with us. And as Mark said, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. So don't hesitate to leave a comment, good or bad. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you again, and make it a great day. We'll see you on the other side. Bye-bye, everyone.